Thank you, Mr. Director. I want to pick up where Mr. Buck began as well by thanking you for your service, and I'm glad that we have an opportunity for one Democrat, one Republican in close succession to thank you for your service to the country. You are being attacked and vilified by some of the members of this committee and others outside this committee because the Justice Department and the FBI has had the audacity to investigate serious allegations of criminal conduct by a former president. And I just want a chance to recap how we got to where we are. During the last administration, and for 4 years, the Justice Department took the position, not unprecedented for the department, that a current president could not be indicted. Now, I think that's a flawed matter as a constitutional principle, but nonetheless, that was the view of the Office of Legal Counsel and the Justice Department during the Trump years, that the President of the United States could not be indicted. My Republican colleagues seem to believe that a former president similarly cannot be indicted. That would effectively make a president above the law, beyond the reach of the law. And in my view, there would probably only one thing the founders would find more politically precarious and dangerous to our Constitution than the indictment of a president or former president, and that is the failure to indict a president or former president when they have engaged in criminal conduct. The Justice Department, I believe, as Representative Lofgren, my fellow member of the January 6th committee, asserted, took a very long time to begin the investigation of Donald Trump and his involvement in January 6th. I believe it began with urgency when it came to the foot soldiers who broke into the Capitol and assaulted police officers that day. But at least what I can tell from the public record, the activities of the president himself, some of which were a matter of very much a public record, such as his tape-recorded conversation with the Secretary of State in Georgia, in which he badgered the Secretary to, quote, find 11,780 votes that don't exist. While that was the subject of investigation by the local district attorney in Fulton County, did not appear to be the subject of investigation for more than a year by the Justice Department. To me, that is inexplicable. This was never the kind of case in which you could roll up the foot soldiers on the higher-ups because there were multiple lines of effort in this plot to overturn the election. I do think that the appointment of the special counsel has accelerated the investigation of the former president's misconduct, and I think that is a positive step for the department and for the country so we can get resolution to this. But likewise, with Mar-a-Lago, notwithstanding the protests of my colleagues, there were repeated requests by the archives to get those documents back from the former president. And then when those were unsuccessful, there was a grand jury subpoena that was administered. And when that was unsuccessful, and only when that was unsuccessful, and there was evidence that the former president was still withholding highly classified materials, did the FBI go to this step of a search warrant. That was more than a year and a half after those initial requests. This was anything but a rush to judgment in the Mar-a-Lago case. So I believe the department, if anything, has exercised enormous caution, I would say too much caution, in the January 6th committee's work and oversight to proceed against a former president when there are serious and credible allegations of criminal conduct. But I want to thank you for your stewardship during this incredibly difficult time. I don't think there's been a more difficult time for an FBI director. And notwithstanding concerns I have expressed, none of them go to your integrity or your commitment to the country, and I want to thank you for that. Let me ask you about a different topic, although related to January 6th as well. But let me ask you broadly about domestic violent extremism. I offered an amendment in this committee, voted down by the Republicans, that we should oversee the increasingly dire threat of domestic violent extremism. One of your recent reports underscored the rise of this prevalent threat, and I'd ask you if you would address it today.
So the rise of domestic violent extremism is something that I and we have been identifying for quite some time. It goes back well before January 6th. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but the Joint Terrorism Task Forces that we hear about so often at the FBI were largely created in response to domestic terrorism, not foreign terrorism. But in my first few years as director, we were identifying this issue more and more, and that's why we elevated in the summer of 2019 racially motivated violent extremism to a national threat priority level. And we saw, I think, about a 40% increase in the number of domestic violent extremism investigations, all before anything to do with January 6th. Obviously, since then, it has continued. But domestic violent extremism cuts across the spectrum from the racially motivated violent extremism, militia violent extremism, anarchist violent extremism, environmental violent extremism, and of course, recently, we've had a lot of violent extremism attacks against pro-life facilities, and we're investigating those. So it really covers a wide spectrum, and what they all have in common is three things: violence or threats of violence, motivated by some ideology, and it varies, in violation of federal criminal law. And that's the domestic violent extremism that I'm talking about when I've identified this phenomenon.
Mr. Chairman, could I request unanimous consent to enter into the record two letters, both from David Weiss, the Trump-appointed U.S. Attorney in Delaware, rebutting allegations concerning partiality in the investigation of the Hunter Biden case? Thank you, Director.
Without objection. Director, what's the difference between a traditional Catholic and a radical traditional Catholic?
I'm not an expert on the Catholic orders.
Well, your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you could define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
You were aghast, then why won't you let us talk to the people who put it together?
We are working on finishing an internal review into what happened
We have
there.
to wait. We, the Congress, and the American people have to wait until you do an internal review. It's not a criminal investigation going on here. An internal review before we can talk to the people who wrote this?
When we finish our internal review, which will be very soon, we will come back before the committee
in America?
and to provide a briefing on what we found.
Well, we appreciate the briefing. We want to talk to the people who wrote it. Any idea how many Catholics there are in America, Director?
No, sir.
There's a lot, over 60 million. What percentage of those are radical traditional Catholics, according to the Richmond Field Office of the FBI?
Again, that product is not something that I will defend or excuse. It's something that I thought was appalling and removed it.
Let's read from that product, page 4 of that product. By the way, the copy you gave us, when can we get a copy that didn't have all these redactions on it so we can actually see what the American taxpayers were paying for to see their rights, their First Amendment religious liberty rights attacked? Let me just read from page 4. Provide new opportunities to mitigate extremist threat through outreach to traditional Catholic parishes and the development of sources with the placement and access to report on places of worship. That's pretty fancy language for they're trying to put informants in the parish, in the church. That's what this memorandum said, Director, from one of your field offices. And you won't let us talk to the people who did it. Any response to that?
I didn't know. I was waiting for the question.
No, you think priests should be informants inside the church, Director?
We do not recruit, open, or operate confidential human sources to infiltrate, target, report.
But that's not what this said. It sounds like you were trying to do it in Richmond, Virginia.
No, sir. No, sir.
You weren't? This didn't happen? You can assure us that this didn't happen?
That product did not, to as best as we can tell, result in any investigative action as a result of it. None.
You know what the motivation for this was? Why would they even think about doing this? You know what the motivation was?
Well, again, I think that's what our internal review will find, and I'd rather wait until I hear what the results of that internal review are.
Well, I don't need an internal review. I can read the document. I assume you can do the same, because it says right there on the same page. Richmond assesses extremist interest in radical traditional Catholics is likely to increase over the next 12 to 24 months in the run-up to the next general election. Same paragraph. Events in which extremists and radical traditional Catholics might have common cause include legislation, judicial decisions in such areas as abortion rights, immigration, affirmative action, and LGBTQ protections. It's politics. That's the motivation. In the run-up to the next election, and they talk about the border, affirmative action, and abortion rights, It's total politics. I mean, I think it's interesting that we just got a decision from a bunch of Catholics who sit on the United States Supreme Court relative to affirmative action. Politics was the total motivation here, and that's what's scary. That's what's, I think, so frightening, and how this happens, I don't know. And 5 people signed off on it. 5 people, including the Chief Division Counsel at the Richmond Field Office. I'd like to talk to this lawyer. And a lot of people in this room went to law school, get a course on the Constitution, talks about the First Amendment. I find that really scary. Again, when do you think we're going to have a chance? How soon are you going to complete this internal investigation so we can talk to these folks who put this together?
I expect us to be able to brief the committee on our internal review later this summer.
Will that briefing include the names of the individuals who put this document together attacking Americans' First Amendment liberty?
I'm not sure yet what it'll include because it's not done yet, but when it is, we'll provide you with an appropriate briefing.
What are you doing to fix it so this doesn't happen again?
Well, we've already started putting in place a number of fixes, and those will be further informed by the results of the review.
What are those fixes? More training, more things, more. That's that same thing you told us on FISA. And while you may have some improvement, you still got 204,000 times the database was illegally searched. So what are the training and procedures you're putting in place?
Well, I'll put the FISA stuff to the side.
I'm just using that as an example of where you've told us the same thing, you fixed something, and you haven't.
I do not believe the number that you just invoked on the FISA side is since the reforms, the fixes, as you called them.
Can we get an unredacted?
Those post-date the numbers that you're referring to.
Director, can we get an unredacted copy while you're still doing this internal investigation? Can we at least get an unredacted copy of this memorandum?
I will find out if there's more of the document that can be shared with you. We've tried to be very careful in what we redact, and there's always a basis for it. So let me go back and see if there's more that we can provide. But I know my instructions are to be as sparing as possible in the redactions that we provide.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Director, I think it's quite rich.
Hey guys, welcome to Emerging Channel. Today we're going to talk about how to describe your personality at someone else. A suitable answer to a personality question should include strong words, hearing managers want to hear. Some of these words include savvy, risk taker, observant, energetic, creative, and organized. Others include courageous, honest, driven, result-oriented, positive, methodical, orderly, and adventurous, among others. For Travis, put like in comments and subscribe. Bye.